Okay, so we're now going to move to a presentation around TB guideline development in India, and I would like to welcome to the stage two presenters, Dr. Nischal, who's an assistant professor at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and Dr. Hannah Ryan, who is a TB Cochrane editor.
Thank you, Dr. Tyron. A very warm good afternoon from India. At the outset, I must thank Dr. Paul and Dr. Tyron for inviting us to present this topic at this informed gathering. I will be talking about Index TB guideline, which stands for Indian Extrapulmonary Tuberculosis Guideline. And at the outset, I must say that Hannah and me have intellectual interest in this presentation as we were part of the guideline formation team. However, we have no financial declaration to make. So this guideline is different from what guidelines we have seen so far, because this is the first evidence-informed guideline on extrapulmonary TB in the world. And considering we have not been able to prove life anywhere in the universe, I can safely assume this is the first guideline, evidence-based guideline on EPTB in the universe. Another important thing is that this is first guideline in Asia which has used grid approach for generating evidence. Now, why this guideline is important in our scenario? Because India is highest TB burden country in the world because of its sheer huge population. This is the second most populous country in the world. And extrapulmonary TB guideline constitute around 18% of new TB cases. And in HIV patients, this contributes around 50% all newly diagnosed TB. In spite of TB being endemic in India, there has been uncertainty about diagnosis, duration of treatment, adjunctive treatments to be used in this condition, and what should be the endpoint of the treatment. Most of these cases are treated outside our national program, which creates another barrier in eradicating this disease. So keeping this thing in mind and background that our RNTCP program, which is Revised National TB Control Program, national program to fight against TB, mainly deals with pulmonary TB. The reason behind that, it is considered the contagious form which causes spread of disease in the society. So RNTCP has concentrated mainly on pulmonary TB. So it was decided by the clinician that it's time that we have something on extrapulmonary TB as well, with which the head of department at Medicine AIIMS New Delhi approached Central TB Division, which is part of the Government of India, and a core committee was formed to tackle this issue. So a group of 200 clinicians from different parts of the country formed a group, and when you have extraordinary brains in forming one guideline, then it's really difficult to manage them. So here came the role of Cochrane Infectious Disease Group, led by Dr. Paul, who brought everyone on the same page. The funding was provided by Global Health Advocates India and World Health Organization, Country Office India. So this was the huge group which was formed with mandate of providing uniform, up-to-date and evidence-based practice guidelines for detection, diagnosis and management of various forms of TB, and to direct further research by identifying knowledge gaps. With keeping in mind target audience being the public and private sector clinicians, general practitioners, and TB program managers and policy makers. Now I will hand over to Hannah to continue with the process which we followed.
Hi, thanks Neerja. So I went with Paul as the methodology support team, along with our colleague Pratap Darian from the South Asian Cochrane Centre and some others. And the first stage was a scoping exercise and some priority setting. So these 13 groups of about 200 clinicians and specialists from across India came together and prepared literature reviews, conventional literature reviews, and these were presented at a 5-day meeting. And we assisted with really getting to grips with what the key issues were, where the points of clinical equipoise were, and helping to set some priorities. So you can see we came up with a very long list of things across all forms of EPTB. There are several dozen forms of EPTB because it affects every organ system of the body. And what we tried to do was look for current important dilemmas, areas where care could be improved, patient outcomes could be improved, or adverse events could be avoided, or where we could impact on use of resources. And also areas where systematic reviews or evidence summaries were feasible given the time and resource constraints. And we came up with these 3 questions. Should we use expert for lymph node TB, TB meningitis, or pleural TB? Should we use steroids in these forms of EPTB? And how long should we treat lymph node TB, abdominal TB, and TB meningitis? And we stratified these questions by HIV status also. So we had about 4 months where we prepared evidence summaries. So myself and other authors, including Sophie Julien from CIDG, as well as some of the younger members of the groups from India, worked on these evidence summaries, and these involved updating existing systematic reviews or adapting existing systematic reviews, and also performing a couple of new reviews. And really what we put together were summaries of the methods, summary of findings tables, and grade assessments, and these were presented by the authors at the next meeting in July 2015. This panel had a chance to look at the methods, results, grade assessment, to criticize and adjust the grade assessment, and also consider the implications of the effects estimates. So particularly for expert, we tried to get the guideline panel to consider the implications of the effects estimates for false positives, false negatives, for example. There was lots of debate and discussion, so sometimes got quite animated, and that was good for us to see. But we were able to make consensus-based recommendations on all of our questions, and we recorded these in evidence to decision-making tables, which are available in the finished guideline, so that you can see how these recommendations were made and the focus of the guideline panel's discussion around these recommendations. So the finished guideline includes 3 main elements. So there were areas identified in the scoping review that we felt were we could make good practice statements. So the guidelines panel considered a set of good practice statements, which we have called principles. So these are areas where we felt we didn't need to do detailed evidence review. For example, offering HIV testing to all patients who present with EPTB. We then have our evidence-informed recommendations, which use the grade approach. And then we also have a set of expert opinion-led clinical guides. And this was really driven by the demands of the guideline group to put together a comprehensive guideline. But we felt it was very important to distinguish between evidence-informed recommendations using grade and these expert opinion-led clinical guides. And I hope that we've done that in the finished guideline product. And then stage 4 was the publication of the guidelines. The whole guideline was reviewed by the core committee, and any kind of errors in the presentation were hammered out. We tried to collect a comprehensive set of declarations of interest, and that wasn't totally successful, but we had a good go at it. They were peer-reviewed by a set of national and international topic experts and methods experts, as well as health policy experts. And finally, they were published by the Government of India in conjunction with WHO and as a policy document, which has just very recently appeared in the Indian Journal of Medical Research. So this is the guidelines launch, which is a who's who of the great and the good in TB and health policy in India, as well as Paul. And just finally, these are 3 sort of take-home messages, 3 things we learnt from this project. So national guideline groups can establish guidelines for big, difficult, messy clinical challenges using evidence-informed methods. This is really a social process to try and get down to the key areas. So start big with lots of problems, but focus down on important clinical questions. And diversity in guideline groups is challenging, but definitely necessary, and helped us to have good quality guidelines in the end. And here is where you can find these guidelines. And please do come and ask us afterwards about this process and this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Very clear presentation of quite a lot of work there. Are there comments or criticisms or queries that people would like to raise? Yes, sir.
Thank you for the nice presentation. I am Krishna from Nepal, a neighboring country to India. Following the presentation from Bhutan as well as this one, what I have been getting a question in my mind is, what do you think is the key starting point to work on these kind of guidelines? Because I happened to be reading a news this morning from Nepalese media that this being a post-monsoon season, being a dengue season, and then the dengue outbreaks are coming up in the country. And one of the leading physicians who wrote a news in the media that we need our own guidelines for managing, diagnosing, and treating dengue in the country. So that was the news heading. And what do you think, based on your experience, that can influence or, make these kind of things happen in the country to make guidelines based on evidences like this?
Yeah,
Thank you.
The answer lies in your question only. You'll have to realize what is important for your country. By making these guidelines, whether the resource allocation is going to change, whether the disease pattern is going to change, or whether the outset of the clinician, the mind of the clinician regarding approach to that particular disease is going to change. That should be the priority. Like in our case, extrapulmonary TB was being ignored completely in our program. So we thought it's high time now that we are more or less tackling pulmonary TB in a decent way. And with the advent of HIV infection in our society, it was essential for us to deal with that only. So the priority based on the need of your society is the most important aspect. And then we should approach accordingly. And it's always wiser decision to take your government policies right at the start, your government medical agencies in the loop. Then the chances of the guidelines to be made as a policy will be much better.
Yeah, so you can see from the slide there about how many different agencies were involved in this initiative, and we really stepped in as just to support with the methods, but there was great political and there was great will within the guidelines group to make it happen and to make it successful, and really that didn't come from us, it came from the AIMS team and from CTD and from the program itself. So it really took a lot of communication and getting together and agreeing on a strategy and a way forward.
Hi, Karen Steingart, CIDG. I've worked with World Health Organization, provided systematic reviews as evidence base for the development of guidelines. And what I wonder about, and I'm going to bring it back to the EPTB guidelines, is if there are other efforts going on, very comprehensive resource, a lot of funding. For instance, I guess it was published after the Index TB, I believe, but there was a 7-year process with the American Thoracic Society and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the WHO involved in updating the treatment guidelines for drug-susceptible TB. And so, like, when do you have to do it yourself? Like, when does the guideline, when do you draw from someone else's work? When do you really feel that there's so much value in the process in your own setting, be it at a national level or even a regional level? And just trying to get a feel for that. And the reason I ask is personal in some ways, because I put a lot of work into this World Health Organization guidelines, and sometimes I wonder, are they picked up by countries, or do countries, even use them, or do they feel they want to go through a similar process themselves and, tailor it to their needs? I don't know. It's kind of an open-ended question. Maybe other people could comment.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. Comparing US guideline made for a developing country, that's slightly difficult, because the challenges which we face as a developing country is entirely different from US. US, the number of patients in US may be minuscule as compared to that in India. So we cannot directly borrow all those guidelines and straight away put in our system. So it's very essential to identify what problem we are facing in our society and then proceed accordingly. So TB is more or less now a disease of the developing world. So based on whatever resources, whatever problems we are facing, we have to tackle accordingly. Otherwise, we may not succeed by taking guidelines or borrowing it directly from other societies. So that's why it's essential that we had approached this way.